Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. I'm back in the garden. I brought back the bamboo, partially by request, partially because it's really bright these days in LA, and so the study where I record gets really, really hot when it's bright outside because it's all windows. So it's like a greenhouse, basically. So anyway, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, welcome to the channel. I hope you like the bamboo. I hope you like the fact that I'm outside. There might be some very loud birds. I apologize for that. There's not much I can do about that. There's a lot of birds around. So what are we here to talk about today? It's a Blu-ray review, and it is, let me just grab the Blu-ray. I have it on the chair right next to me, Boat People. So actually, I kind of misspoke. This is not a full-on proper Blu-ray review. What I'll be doing is I'll be talking about this movie, and then I'll be talking about two of the bonus features that are on here. There are a ton of supplements on here in terms of time. There's like a full-length documentary and all this stuff, right? So what I did was I watched the two things that I found that I had the time to watch right after the movie. I'm going to talk about those supplements, and I'm going to talk about the film. This film was released in 1982. It's directed by Anne Hui, who is a pivotal, kind of figure in the Hong Kong New Wave. She also made the story of Wu Viet, which I have right here, which is upside down, but there you go. Chow Yun-fat is in this film. And it stars George Lam is in it, and Andy Lau is in it, and Cora Mew is in it, and Season Ma, who I think this is maybe her first movie. She's very young. She plays like a 14-year-old in the film. And so if you're unfamiliar with this movie, it takes place so basically the opening scene, and I should say the opening shot in this film is incredible. It's like 3 minutes long. It's this crazy crane shot, like coming up and down. And as I learned in the bonus features, they actually used a truck to move the camera, and it's crazy. You'll see what I mean when you watch the film. But it opens with the Communist army in Vietnam liberating a city, and as they're liberating a city, there's a Japanese photojournalist there taking photos. Then it skips ahead 3 years. All of Vietnam has been liberated and is under the control of the Ho Chi Minh government, and the Japanese photojournalist is invited back to Vietnam as a friend of the government by the Cultural Bureau to take photos, with the idea being that the world will see those photos and see how well Vietnam is doing under the regime of Ho Chi Minh. And what ends up happening is this photographer from Japan, he starts to see that what they're showing him is being staged for his benefit. And he wants to see the real Vietnam and what's actually happening. And so he starts to venture out on his own and find people in the city, and he befriends this girl who's very poor, and she has two brothers, and the mom, her dad died in the war, the Vietnam War. So it's the three kids and the mom, and they live together in this kind of like shack, and he starts following her around the city, and he sees a totally different version of what's going on. That's a lot bleaker. This is a very, very bleak film. So if you're interested in seeing it, if you want a quick hit, if you don't want to watch this whole review, it's really kind of, I don't want to call it an art house drama, because it was actually like a commercial success when it came out. And I think when you say art house, it kind of gives this connotation of the fact that it's a movie that like 6 people saw, right? And this is not like, it's not like a deliberately confusing, obtuse, strange film. Like, it's a drama that has elements of war film, elements of thriller, and it actually has some kind of comedic, like lighthearted bits and pieces too, even though it's a very, very bleak film, like I said. But it's really kind of a drama that's looking at the after effects of war, and in a kind of bigger way than that, looking at regime change and the kind of class structure within society. So it's not a martial arts film, it's not an action film, it's not a heroic bloodshed film, it's not Girls with Guns film, like, it's not any of those genres, right? It's very much a drama. But I hesitate to call it an art house drama, because I think that gives the impression, like I said, that it's a very niche film, where it was actually, played at the Cannes Film Festival. I'll talk more about that later in this review when it came out. and it was a commercial success in Hong Kong, from what I understand. And so a lot of people would say that this is one of the best Hong Kong films ever made. And I'm saying this based on things I've read, things I've heard, lists that I've seen. I first heard of this film from lists of the greatest Hong Kong films ever made. That's what made me really want to see it. I also want to give a quick shout out here to the writer, because as I will talk about a little bit later in the review, the script process, from everything that the director says, was very important to the making of this film, and the script was essential to kind of the process. And the script was written by Dai An Ping, and I think it was very different than, you hear a lot about these Hong Kong films where the script is just one piece of paper with bullet point plot points on it, right? Like, I think this was like a Western style script that was like written, and it was written over the course of about a year. So a lot of work went into it, right? Because that's a pretty long time too. I mean, this is like, I think this film is about 100 minutes long. So 110 minutes. So, that would be about 110 pages, at least as in a Western style written script. So to work on that for a year, that's a lot of work going into a script. So to give you my thoughts on this film, this is a fantastic movie. It is a fantastic movie. It very much deserves its reputation, and I would give it whatever, like the highest grade that I could give. I would give it like an A+ or something like that, right? It is a very harrowing film. It is an emotionally devastating film, and it's a film that operates at a very high level as filmmaking. The way that this film depicts an entire society through the eyes of one character, really, but that character's interactions with other characters, right? It actually kind of reminded me of Hurt Locker. Now, obviously, Hurt Locker is a war film and kind of a thriller, but what Hurt Locker does really, really well is it has one group of characters who, by the nature of their job, interact with so many different people that you get this high-level overview of a city in a time, in a place. That's very much what this film is. Obviously, it came out, 20-something years before Hurt Locker, right? But to give you a contemporary film that you might be more familiar with as a reference point, this film takes a photographer, and the photographer talks to people who are working in the Ho Chi Minh government, and then he befriends people who are living on the streets in poverty in Vietnam, and it shows you this whole portrait. I guess it gives you an entire portrait of this city and this society in this place and time through all of these characters, and it's really well done. And that's not an easy thing to do, to make a drama that is compelling, that shows a portrait of a society, but that is also that you will invest in as an audience member, right? It's not a political polemic. It's not a film that kind of goes into like being a full-on thriller or a war film, which I think would be a lot easier of a path to take, because then you have a genre and you have staples and touchstones that the audience is familiar with. It sticks to its guns, and it stays as a character-driven drama, and it is extremely compelling and manages to hold your interest throughout the entire film. I think it's a very, very hard thing to do. And so the script, like I said, was very important to this film. When they received the first draft of the script, as An Hui says in the bonus materials here, basically everyone involved in the film was like, this can't be the script. Like, we can't make this. This is not good enough. And so they got a different writer. And they gave that writer took an entire year to rewrite the whole thing from the bottom up. And that shows you how important the script was to the process and how dedicated everyone involved in the film was to making the best film possible. If you don't know what the title refers to, which is also something probably worth pointing out, Boat People refers to refugees who were leaving Vietnam and going to places like Hong Kong on boats. And so An Hui has talked about how she interviewed people who were refugees, who were, there's this whole kind of subgenre of films about the relationship between Hong Kong and the Vietnam War and the aftermath of the war, right? So you have A Better Tomorrow 3, obviously, where they go to Vietnam, bullet in the head, they go to Vietnam. But you have films like On the Wrong Track with Andy Lau, where there's a Vietnamese refugee character, and they actually go into the refugee camps in Hong Kong, and you see that whole world. There's a fair number of Hong Kong films where you can see that relationship, and this film really looks at that, and apparently is based on actual stories that the director and the screenwriter were told by these refugees, the people who left Vietnam and ended up in Hong Kong. And so I'm just looking at my notes here. I mean, the performances of the actors across the board are fantastic here. If I were to criticize this film for one thing, it would be the dub. there are things that like the emotion conveyed by the characters doing the dubbed voices does not match the emotion of the performances of the actors in the film. And when I say dub, if you don't know, they were not shooting sound on the set of these films. They shot the film silently and then they added all the sound afterwards. So even in the Cantonese language track, which has Japanese in it too, because like I said, the character is Japanese, they dubbed it. And Andy Lau's character especially, Andy Lau plays this guy who's kind of like a street punk kind of, and like a grifter kind of thing. And he gets sent to what's called a new economic zone, which is essentially like a labor camp in Vietnam. His performance is really intense and emotional, but the person who's dubbing him does not get there. And so there's this weird, in a way, there in certain scenes where I feel the dubbing really falls a little bit flat of the emotion conveyed by the character. There's a bit of a strange disconnect. But thematically, and again, to talk about the script, like this film, like it works on so many levels. You can be engaged in the characters and the journey that they're going on. But to give you an example of what this film does, right? As I said, the Japanese photojournalist, he interacts with people who work in Ho Chi Minh's government, right? So there's this one guy who's like pretty high up in the government who is one of his liaisons. And through the conversations, you learn that guy was educated at the Sorbonne in Paris, right? And that he loves French food, he drinks French wine and stuff like that. So we know that he is of an elite class, that this guy from Vietnam, at the time when he would have been born, which I'm guessing would have been like the 20s or 30s, right, is able to go to Paris and to get educated there. Like he's not like some street punk kid who rose up and overthrew the government. What you have is the elite class of Vietnam overthrowing the French and then the Americans, right? Because the Vietnam War was originally a French war. Then the Americans came into it, and the Vietnamese communists beat the French and they beat the Americans. And so the people who came into power were people who are educated abroad, who are bringing foreign ideas. Communism is a foreign idea as well, right? Like Karl Marx is from Germany and Lenin and all those guys are from Russia. And they're taking these ideas that they learned at these very prestigious universities and these elite institutions abroad, and they're bringing them home and they're forcing them on the disenfranchised class. And so what you see is a perpetuation of class warfare and just like a shifting face of the oligarchy, right? And you see these elite characters drinking French beer, drinking French wine, drinking whiskey from the United States, like all of these things where they are taking the language of oppressors and using it themselves to oppress their own people. And it's a really interesting perspective on like the continuity of class divided power structures in Vietnam from colonialism until after the Vietnam War. Now, to talk about this point further and to talk about the bonus features on here, this was actually a very controversial film when it first came out and might explain why this is really interesting. It is included on this is the French release of the story of Wu Viet. Boat People is a bonus feature on here. And my first thought was, why would this movie that's more famous in the States than this, like, Boat People, I think, is a higher profile film than the story of Wu Viet, even though the story of Wu Viet has Chow Yun-fat in it. Why would Boat People be a bonus feature? Well, as it turns out, Boat People is a very controversial film in France. It was supposed to perform in competition at the Cannes Film Festival and was removed from competition and just shown as a screening because of the controversial nature of it, because the French government was supportive of Ho Chi Minh's government, essentially. And they didn't want to be seen as critical of that regime. But also, the film Boat People was shot in China. And it had the support of the Chinese government, even though it's a Hong Kong film. And so one of the controversies was, because the Chinese Communist Party is essentially an enemy of the Vietnamese Communist Party, is the film Chinese communist propaganda designed to make Vietnamese communism look bad? that was like a big controversy in France, especially when this film first came out. And Anne Hui says in the press conference from the Cannes Film Festival is on the Blu-ray as a bonus feature. It's 30 minutes long. And Anne Hui gets asked, I'm sorry, getting a lot of glare. She gets asked a lot of questions about that. And what she basically says was, we were supported by the Chinese government in as much as they allowed us to film in China, but it is a Hong Kong film. And when we were in China filming, we were classified as foreign filmmakers. Like, we are not Chinese. We're not from mainland China, and this is not a mainland China film. This is a Hong Kong film done independently with our Hong Kong perspective. And she talks about interviewing all these refugees from Vietnam, and she really staunchly denies the fact that the film is propaganda from the Chinese government. The film was also banned in Taiwan because it's shot in China and was thought to potentially be Chinese propaganda. And also, I believe that Anne Hui's other films were banned in Taiwan as a result of what was perceived as her relationship with the Chinese government because of the situation of making this film. So it's a very controversial film, which I did not know before, which I also find really fascinating. It's really interesting to learn about that from this release. I'm just looking at my notes to see if, I mean, it's a very, very good film. It's like high level filmmaking that deserves to be considered among like the elite tier of international cinema. And it's the ending. People have complained about the ending of this film, and it is a bit melodramatic compared to what has transpired previously in the film. But I don't think it's so over the top or so out of the blue that it ruins the film. And this film has a really profound emotional impact because it's making you look at people in ways that, essentially what this film does is it takes the refugee from the refugee camp in Hong Kong and it tells you who they are. And it's a deeply compassionate film about trying to get people to understand where these refugees are coming from and to empathize with them on a human level and to not try to politicize it or to demonize these people because of the horrible things that they've been through, which were not a result of anything that they themselves did. That they are victims of history and circumstance. And in a way, it reminds me of Deepon, if you're familiar with that film, which actually I think won the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival in 2015, which is a film by Jacques Audiard, who's a French filmmaker who I absolutely love. He made Rust and Bone, which is one of my favorite movies. He made A Prophet, which is a very famous film. Tahir Rahim is in it, and Ryan Coogler loves that movie, the director of Black Panther. He's talked a lot about A Prophet before. But Deepon is a film about these refugees who are from Sri Lanka, and they meet it's a Tamil tiger, which is the army, the Tamil army from Sri Lanka. One of the guys from that army, his unit is all killed and his family dies and he has to go on the run. He goes to a refugee camp, and in the refugee camp he meets a woman who is on the run, and they find like an orphan child and they pretend that they're a family so they can go to France. And that film is very much about humanizing the refugee experience in the same way that this is. And I think it's a very, I could gush about this film for a while, but it's so well done and it's so impactful. But again, it is a drama. So be aware of that. If that's not your thing, I don't know if you'll like this film. But to talk just briefly about the bonus features I watched, like I said, there's that Cannes Film Festival interview, 29 minutes long, where it's all about the controversy surrounding the film. And then there's a 27-minute long conversation between Anne Hui and Stanley Kwan. So Stanley Kwan is a filmmaker. He made Center Stage with Maggie Cheung, which was produced by Jackie Chan. He made a film called Rouge with Anita Mui and Leslie Cheung, which the Criterion Collection is putting out in June of 2022. And he's made a bunch of other very well-known films with a bunch of very famous stars from Hong Kong, and he was an assistant director on this film. And the two of them, Anne Hui and Stanley Kwan, kind of reminisce and remember what it was like making this film, and they share stories about making this film. They wanted Chow Yun-fat for the Andy Lau character. They talk about how they went to him and they could, Anne Hui could kind of tell that he wasn't going to do it, and he's apparently a really nice guy. He was very sweet and apologetic about it, but he just wouldn't do it, and she doesn't say why. But one of the reasons might be, like I said, there was that year-long delay while they were rewriting the script. They were originally going to have a Japanese actor play the Japanese character, and then because of that really long delay, he withdrew from the film. And then they ended up hiring George Lam, who is a Hong Kong actor. Just really interesting stories like that. Anne Hui asks Stanley Kwan what he thinks her worst quality is as a director, which is really interesting. Um, and his answer is actually really funny. Stanley Kwan is interesting because he's very quiet, and um, but he seems like the kind of person who, when he's on set, is like as the director, obviously, like he's the boss, and like the buck stops at him, and he's making this fucking movie, and you're doing what he tells you to do. Like he's has this really interesting thing of he's very quiet and thoughtful, but you can also see how he's a perfectionist, and when he needs to turn it on and be tyrannical, he could definitely do that. His personality is really interesting. Anne Hui seems more just like chill in a way, not like chill, but like kind of like but although Stanley Kwan does say that she loses her temper a lot, or she's very grumpy, is what he says. She gets grumpy really easily. But yeah, it's interesting to see their personalities interacting and stuff like that. But anyway, so I'm talking about Boat People. It is the Criterion Collection release, which came out in February of 2022. My name is Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I thank you so much for watching. As always, I hope you enjoy the bamboo. We'll see you next time.